Hello everyone, welcome to our video for week 3 for practical math, learning about exchange rates. So essential question for this week, how can the ability to algebraically convert forms of currency using ratios be useful when purchasing goods and services in another country? Here's the objectives of what we're going to be learning. We're going to learn how to create an equation to determine the equivalent amount of one currency with a specific amount of another currency. For example, determining how many Mexican pesos it takes to purchase a US dollar, which we'll abbreviate to USD. We'll also learn how to calculate the price of traded goods and services using currency exchange rates. And then finally, analyze the effect of an appreciated or depreciated currency on the price of goods and services in a country. Take notes as you're watching this video. You can pause it at any time to work out examples or think through it. After the video, make sure you look at our week 3 text for further information about this week's topic. Have the video and text as an open resource while working on the discussion questions and all the other assignments for this week. At any time, please contact me if you have questions or are not sure what you're going to do. I'll be giving you feedback on your assignments. I'd love to be working together with you on this class. All right, here we go. Where does your stuff come from? Have you ever thought about where all the stuff you buy actually is made or built or comes from? In particular, what country was it made in? We're a worldwide economic, global stuff. All the stuff is going from all over the place in terms of shipping and receiving and sharing goods with countries. Take a few minutes and look around your home when you get a chance this week and just take a note of where several items are made. For example, I went through mine. I have a Vizio TV that was made in China. I have a couch that was made in the USA. I have a computer that was designed in the US but assembled in China. I have a blanket that was made in China, a shirt that was made in Bangladesh, and a water bottle that again designed in US and made in China. You can kind of see China is a powerhouse in terms of building stuff, creating stuff. A lot of stuff we import from China. Your stuff may be from other places. I'd be curious to kind of know. But what are some observations you make as you look at your own stuff? Did most of it come from Asian countries? Do you have anything that was built or made in the US? Do you see one country seem to be represented more than other countries? How do people from one country pay for the goods and services they buy from another country? So if we think about our worldwide economy, when people buy goods and services imported from another country, or when they visit another country and buy goods and services there, typically they must pay for those goods and services in that country's currency. For example, you buy a Toyota truck built in Japan. That's where Toyota manufactures a lot of trucks. You actually have to purchase that in order to come here in Japanese dollars. And then things get converted and then we buy it here from distributors in US dollars. But anything that does come from overseas has to be purchased at some point in US dollar or in that currency. Likewise, when people from other countries visit the US, so say people from Canada come down to visit to buy goods and services, they need to pay in US dollars. We don't really take Canadian dollars at the 7-Eleven down the road. So importer pays for goods in the currency of the country from which the goods are being imported. They're then sold to domestic consumers who pay for them in the domestic currency. We still don't have a worldwide, one worldwide financial currency we use, and so we have to exchange. We have to do exchange rates. If we're going to Germany, we need to exchange in German dollars. If we're going to Mexico, we need to exchange for Mexican pesos. We need to think about the country we're going to and the money we have. To make these types of transactions easier, people have developed foreign exchange markets, similar to like the stock market. Foreign exchange markets allow people to buy and sell currencies. The price of one currency relative to another then depends on the demand, just like the stock. Think of all the demand for Starbucks stock or Apple stock as it first started out, right? If you own stock in them, it grew and grew because people want a lot of that now. It sort of works like that with currency. There is a demand for certain types of currency and less demand for others. And the price or the value of that currency fluctuates. People say the value of one currency has appreciated or depreciated relative to the other. Appreciation, that occurs when one country's currency increases in value relative to another currency. Depreciation occurs when a country's currency decreases in value relative to another country's currency. We're going to do some examples of these as well. Appreciation is really nice if you're going to be going to another country. If you're going to go to another country, depreciation is not good. For example, when US currency appreciates, it is good news for importers because people in the US, their dollar is worth more, they can buy more goods. However, that same appreciation is bad news for exporters because our goods are now more expensive for foreigners to buy. If we're selling something to people in Brazil, because our dollar is worth more, it's more expensive for them to buy it. They may not want to buy it as much. When US currency depreciates, that means it's decreasing relative to other countries. It's bad news for us importing in because our dollar is not worth as much. We can buy fewer goods for that dollar. Things get more expensive. However, that same change is good news for exporters because our goods are now less expensive for foreigners to buy. So it's kind of it depends on if you're an importer or an exporter in terms of appreciation, depreciation, whether it's good or bad for you. Generally in the US, an appreciated dollar is good for us because our dollar is worth more and we can buy more stuff from other countries. Is all that making any sort of sense? We're using a lot of words, we're thinking a lot about things. Let's watch a short video to kind of help again explain this concept of a foreign exchange market and try and make it a little bit more clear for you guys.
Most nations in the world issue and use their own currency. The United States has dollars, Great Britain has pounds, Japan has yen, and so on. In addition, several nations might agree, among other things, to jointly issue and use a single currency. Most of the European nations are in the European Union, and a subset of them use the euro as their common currency. For citizens of one country to buy goods or services from another country, they must first buy the currency used by the other country. An exchange rate is the price of one nation's currency in terms of another nation's currency. 1 US dollar might be worth 11 Mexican pesos. With that information, you can also calculate the value in US dollars of 1 Mexican peso. When the value of a currency changes and can purchase more of other currencies, it is said to strengthen or appreciate. When a currency changes and can purchase less of other currencies, then it is said to weaken or depreciate. To better understand the effects of changes in exchange rates, let's imagine that Peter, an American, takes a trip to France and Pierre, a Frenchman, takes a trip to the United States. Because France is a member of the European Union and uses euros as its currency, Peter must convert his American dollars to euros, and Pierre must convert his euros to dollars, so that each has cash to spend while on vacation. Let's say that the exchange rate just before they departed was 0.8 euros to the dollar. Peter converts his $1,000 to 800 euros, and Pierre converts his 800 euros to $1,000. By the end of their trips, let's say that each has spent half of his cash. Peter has 400 euros and Pierre has $500. As they prepare to return home, the exchange rate has changed and is now 0.88 euros to the dollar. That is, the dollar has strengthened or appreciated compared to the euro. Pierre is happy to find that his $500, worth only 400 euros when he left, is now worth 440 euros. Peter, however, is disappointed when he finds out that his 400 euros, worth $500 when he left, is now only worth $454 and change. He has lost nearly $46 in purchasing power due to a change in the exchange rate. Pierre, however, enjoyed an exceptionally nice dinner at his favorite restaurant back home with his newfound cash. Changes in exchange rates can have a large impact on international trade. Imagine that the Japanese yen appreciates in relation to the dollar, meaning that $1 now buys fewer yen than it once did. One of the results of this change is that Japanese goods are now relatively more expensive for Americans. The opposite is true for the Japanese. Their yen have increased purchasing power compared to the dollar, making American goods relatively less expensive. If you were watching trade between the U.S. and Japan, you would expect to see Americans buying fewer goods and services from Japan, while Japanese consumers would likely increase their purchases of American goods and services. As with all prices, the exchange rate is determined by the supply and demand for different currencies.
All right, so coming back after that video, let's do some examples. Let's start using some math to think about exchange rates. Here's a table showing exchange rates for January for the Thai baht, the Japanese yen, the Mexican peso, and the Canadian dollar. We can see that in January, this was the exchange rate in relation to the US dollar. And then 1 month later in March, you can see that there's some fluctuation, right? Especially with the Canadian dollar. At first, it was worth less compared to the dollar, but it appreciated and now it's worth more compared to the dollar. So we'll kind of look around at some examples. We're going to do some math with the table values here and just understand how these exchange rates can vary in terms of the price of goods. An exchange rate is just simply a ratio between two currencies. A ratio describes the relationship between two measures, expressed as the number of times one is bigger or smaller than the other. For example, we're used to 1 mile is about 1.6 kilometers. So we would say the ratio is 1 mile to 1.6 kilometers. We can write it as a fraction. It describes the relationship between miles and kilometers and indicates that kilometer is 1.6 times longer than a mile, or 1 mile is 0.625 the length of a kilometer. In the exchange rate chart we looked at, the ratio of Japanese yen to the American dollar during January was 103.21 to 1. That means there's 103.21 yen to 1 US dollar. All right, here's our first problem. The cost of a cheeseburger in Japan is 535.53 yen. If the exchange rate in January is $1 to 103.21 yen, how much does the cheeseburger cost in US dollar? That's the question we're going to answer. Well, let's use a ratio. We know that there's 103.21 yen to 1 US dollar, right? And that's our exchange rate. What we're trying to find, however, is we have a hamburger that's cost this much, 535.53 yen. And we're trying to figure out how much is the cost of a hamburger in US dollars. So I'm going to use a variable. I'm going to use X because I don't know it. I got to figure it out. But look at that, there is my ratio problem. I have a ratio that I'm given of yen to the US dollar. I know this ratio, and the exchange rate has to be the same ratio as the cost of the hamburger to US dollars. And with my ratio problem, I can use cross multiplication now to solve this thing out and find out the cost of a dollar. So cross multiplication is just simply rewriting this equation differently. So 1 times 535.53. So I cross multiply the two things together. Has to equal, it's still an equation, so I need the equal sign. The other two multiplied. 103.21 times X number of dollars. Now to solve this, I simply divide both sides and I need to solve for X. So divide both sides by 103.21. Those divide out and we're left with X equaling, let's pull out my calculator here. $535.53 divided by 103.21, and it costs in US dollars $5.19 if I round to the nearest cent. So that is, if I exchange my US dollars, that's how many US dollars I would need to purchase that hamburger in Japan. Got it? Not too bad, right? Now, if the exchange rate, so the cost of a cheeseburger in Japan is still the same, right? A month later, 2 months later, it's still the same when I go to that hamburger place. But now, 2 months later, January, February, March, the exchange rate is a little bit different, right? Instead of 103, which what it was, 103 point, what was it? I can't remember, 103.21. Instead of 103.21, now it's 116.25. So let's see what this increase in terms of the ratio, what it actually does to our cheeseburger cost. So we're going to do the same problem, but now it's March. I'm visiting Japan in March. Now I need to figure out, well, how many US dollars do I need to exchange for to buy that same hamburger? Notice the hamburger price has not changed. It's the same in Japan. If I lived in Japan, I'm still paying the same amount. But now that I'm a US person bringing my US dollars into Japan in March, this new exchange rate is going to change things around. So we still have, let's still set up my ratio, 116.25 yen to the dollar is equal to the same price of the hamburger, but I need to find the new price of what my hamburger will be in US dollars. Let me switch colors here. I'm still going to cross multiply, set up my equation. 1 times 535.53. And again, as you do this math, you may find quicker ways to do it. Again, I'm just working through this for everyone so they can follow through all my steps really well. So there we go. Set up my ratio problem. We cross multiplied to get the similar equation just with multiplication. To solve it, I'm going to divide both sides by 116.25. And now let's see what we get when I divide by my new amount. So 535 and 0.53 divided by 116.25. And this time I get $4.61. Well, look at that. In living in Japan, the cost of the hamburgers stayed the same, but what we can see is the US dollar appreciated, right? Instead of being worth 103.21 yen, it appreciated. Appreciate. That's a really sloppy appreciated, but you get it. $1 is worth more. It's worth more yen. So now, as a US person visiting, I'm bringing my US money. I go to the exchange rate. My dollar is worth more yen. That ultimate end of things is that hamburger is cheaper, about 50 cents cheaper, right? So our dollar can purchase more goods. It's worth more. It appreciated compared to the Japanese yen. That's an example of what appreciation and these fluctuating exchange rates can do. In the previous example, we saw that during the 2-month span of time, the cheeseburger in Japan got cheaper for us to buy in US dollars. That means the dollar appreciated in relation to the Japanese yen, and we were able to purchase more. Let's look at another example here. Now the cost of a cheeseburger in Canada is about 5.5 Canadian dollars, right? Oh, Canada. If the exchange rate in January is $1 to 1.05 Canadian, how much does it cost me in United States dollars? All right, let's set up my ratio problem. So 1.05 Canadian to 1 US dollar. Notice they're actually pretty close to each other, right? And my hamburger cost 5.5 in Canadian. and I want to compare it to X number of US dollars. There we go. We just set up our exchange rate. Let's cross multiply to solve this out. 5.5 times 1 is equal to 1.05 times X. We divide both sides by 1.05 to solve it out. So that cost of a hamburger for me in US dollars is going to be 5.5 divided by 1.05. It's going to cost me $5.24 with my US dollars. So it's a little bit cheaper, right? I don't have to pay as much as a Canadian does. My dollar is worth a little bit better than the Canadian. But now let's compare that to 2 months later. Stuff is exchanging. The whole financial exchange market is changing. And what happens? What do we see? My $1 is now worth 0.97 Canadian. It was 1.05, so it's gone down. It's not worth as much. Yikes. Let's see how much the cost of a cheeseburger now is. So my 0.97 Canadian, this is the exchange rate to 1 US dollar. We always start with that. What am I trying to solve? Well, my hamburger is still the same. In Canada, the price hasn't fluctuated. So my hamburger at 5.5 is still there, but now the exchange rates have fluctuated. I need to figure out now how much is my US dollar worth. Let's cross multiply, solve it out. You probably see that it just needs to be 5.5 equals 0.97 times X. Let's divide both sides by 0.97 to solve for X. And 5.5 divided by 0.97. I am now paying $5.67 for that hamburger. It's a little bit more expensive now, right? That's not so much good for me as a US person visiting Canada. A dollar is worth less. So we go. The previous example with Canadian dollars. During that 2-month span of time, the cheeseburger in Canada became more expensive for us to buy in US dollars. The US dollar depreciated in relation to the Canadian dollar, and we were able to purchase less. So there you go, a couple examples about appreciation and depreciation using ratios, using math, doing some currency exchanges. Here's an online calculator that you can use if you want to see the exchange rate between the US dollar and any other currency in the world. You can also kind of create a budget and you can play around with, maybe you want to move to Spain for a year. You can get an idea of how much things will cost over there in terms of different country. You can also see how much appreciation or depreciation has happened. All right, here I am at that website that I gave you. So we can convert US dollars. We can switch between all sorts of currencies, right? Euro is the EUR is the euro. It's what a lot of the European countries do. A lot of these I do not even know. You'll have to look up. Let's just keep it to the euro and say we wanted to actually do that Spain thing. So we're going to bring $1,000 to Spain for a trip. And we can see that it converts to 907.60 euros, right? There's the exchange rate. Let's say we want to buy a hotel. So we'll stay 7 nights in a hotel. Let's say the hotel costs, we don't know how much it is, but let's say it's 180 a night. So let's submit the item and we can see that my $180 a night hotel room today would be $198.33. That's how much money I need. 2 months ago, it would have cost me $201. So not too much change, right? The dollar has appreciated. I can buy more. That same hotel room is costing me a little less today than it did 3 years ago. I saved like $3, so it's nothing major dramatic. The euro is a pretty steady currency, but you can kind of get an idea of how things change from time to time. If you're going to plan a big trip, definitely start looking at the exchange rates and get an idea of how much things are worth. Are they increasing, decreasing, appreciating, or depreciating? All right, that does it for week 3. What did we do? We played around with equations to determine the equivalent amount of one currency specific to the amount of the other. We calculated the price of traded goods and services using currency exchange rates. We analyzed the effect of what appreciation or depreciation can do on the price of goods and services in a country, used math, used ratios, and have a better sense of how economics works across the world.